Hi there, welcome to the first breakout session of IT Forum 2007. We're very excited to be here. My name is Peg McNichol. I'm a product manager in the Windows Vista Enterprise team. The focus of my job for the past year has been application compatibility and helping our enterprise customers with their application compatibility issues and giving them all the support we can from Corp. I'm very excited to have with me today Chris Jackson. Chris is the technical lead on our AE SWAT team. So he leads and trains all of our top Microsoft consultants on how to work with application compatibility, both technically and through the project management end of things. So I'm really excited to have Chris here. He's going to be contributing to the second half of this presentation, which is talking about the tools. We also have two other sessions. Immediately following this session, there is a chalk talk that Chris will be leading based on all his deployments that he's been doing over the past year, his experience at customer sites. And then tomorrow there's a lightning demo that will go over some of the tools that we talk about today again. So, how many people have started their Windows Vista deployment? Wow. Machines in operation? That's super. And how many of you used the application compatibility toolkit for part of that work? 1, 2, okay. So what I'm going to focus on today is something that I've been hearing from customers. I spend a lot of time at customer sites and in conferences, and the main thing that they tell me is, I say, have you started on your deployment? And first they shake their heads and say, oh no, no, no. And then when you get a little bit deeper, they say, well, we have started our planning, and when we look into our environment, we realize that we have so many applications, we don't know what they are, we don't know where they came from, we don't know what the support model is. So what we're going to focus on today, first of all, how do you get to the point in your organization that you can use the fabulous tools that Chris is going to talk about? Because that's been a real stumbling block for us. You're going to find most of this content will be available tomorrow on TechNet in the form of a white paper as well. So we will have more resources for you on that. So, getting started with enterprise application compatibility. The first question I ask our customers is, where are you now? What's your environment like now? And the answer that I like to hear, the one that makes the conversation easiest, is, well, we're running Windows XP, SP2. We have a completely managed environment. I know every application, and all of my users are standard users. How many of you are there today? That's very impressive. The good news is your migration is going to be a lot easier than other people. More often, I hear, oh, well, we have a bit of a mixture. You know, some Windows XP, we have some legacy Windows 2000 kicking around, and maybe an NT machine running an old piece of hardware that cost us $1 million, so we aren't going to move it. And then we have some applications that LCA runs that only run on Windows 98 or Windows 95 or something I don't even want to think about. So we have customers with this vast array of environments that they're dealing with. And what we tell them is, oh, well, collect an inventory, analyze your inventory, and then fix it. Good to go. Well, it's not quite that easy. So today I'm going to work with you on how to assess your current inventory. How do you take a look at what you've got, where to find it, how to actually gather the inventory, the decisions you want to make, thinking about what the critical resources in your organization are. It would be really nice if the IT department got to make all the IT decisions in a company, but for the most part, that's not true. So how do you identify those partners? How to help you plan your work. And then overall, I was at the Gartner IT Symposium earlier this year, and one of the things that kept on coming up was thinking about your in-house architecture. And do you have an accidental architecture, or do you have an architecture by design? It's been a long time since we last had an OS launch, 7 years since a full-on launch, and that's come from every 2 years before that. So oftentimes people look at their Windows Vista deployment and they say, well, I have $24 million to deploy these 27,000 seats, and 9 or 10 million of that has to go to application compatibility. Why should I upgrade? Well, I think we need to look at those costs realistically. It is an expensive project, but it's also a project that can take you not only to Windows Vista, but prepare you for the next 10 years of computing when you need to think about things like SOA and your web apps and take you into that next phase. One of the things that we talk about a lot at Microsoft now, and you're going to hear in pretty much every session you go to, is about the optimized infrastructure and how you can actually save costs in your workplace. Chris here has been involved with this a lot in customer sites. He's going to talk a little bit more about this in terms of app compat.
Absolutely. Well, I work with customers day in and day out. I work with all of you. So most of the information I have actually comes from people just like you. And we're trying to learn exactly what we can do to end up in a scenario that's better than we are today. Because if we simply take the application compatibility problem as just that, an application compatibility problem that I'm going to solve for this migration, at the end I have all of the same apps working exactly the same way that they do today. I'm just $40 million lighter in the wallet. Right? So we look at and we talk to customers and they think, what can we do to learn from this experience and get better from this experience so that I can do more in my environment with the applications that I have? What am I not as good at as I would like to be? How's my testing? Am I able to run automated tests for all of the applications in my environment at the click of a button? Or at least the ones I developed in-house? Have the developers provided me with unit tests that I can automate? Or do I just have to sit there and poke around with the mouse to try and see what happens on a new operating system, or when Patch Tuesday rolls around, or when a new version of that application comes around? How does that work? Can I quickly deploy applications and get them out there? Do I have quality standards? When I see the same thing breaking again and again when I'm doing my compatibility tests, how can I put in a test to ensure that the same thing doesn't happen the next time around, and therefore improve the overall quality of my entire infrastructure and of the applications that I choose to run in my organization? So when we talk about this optimization model, it's all about what can I leave behind that's truly remarkable, and not just can I test these apps and get this migration over with, to move me from a more basic organization where I can test it given enough people and enough time and enough money, to a much more dynamic and agile organization where I can quickly test and ensure the quality of the applications that I'm running, deploy them to whichever users I choose to, know what's running on my end users' machines, and be able to manage that overall quality from start to finish. And so that's when we're working on this optimization model around application management to try and improve that and pick off which takeaway we can focus on any particular migration.
And I think one thing one of the valuable pieces of this knowledge for yourself as the IT pro who might be responsible for the application management is that when you go back after you've made your plan and put your proposal together and found your team, this is a really valuable point to take to your CIO or your CEO when you're trying to explain away that $9 or $10 or $20 million cost that you're looking at to get started with your deployment. So, as I said, we always talk about there are 3 phases to your application management when you're starting a new deployment, or this is what we've found working with customers, what their best practices are. The first one is really about collecting those inventories, analyzing the information you get in the inventory, and then test and mitigate. And it's funny because I've presented this over and over and over again over the last year, and people say, yes, that's the order. But how do I collect? I say, well, you use ACT. Well, why should I use ACT? Or what's the difference between a static or a dynamic analysis? So what we're focusing on today is really the beginning of this part. It's that how do you get a good collection of inventory, and then how do you begin your analysis? Because if you get that plan down well, then that's one of the things that helps move you, first of all, to the more architecture by design, and then finally to your really dynamic desktop and optimization. Now tomorrow, Chris has a session on mitigating application compatibility with shims.
Yes.
Is that what it's called? Yeah.
Yes.
So if you want a deeper technical dive on part 2, that's going to be a great session for you, as well as the chalk talk that we have immediately following this. So, wrong PC. I like to think about your application management as a house. You know, some people, they have a house that their family has lived in for generations and generations. And if you ask them what's in the attic, I don't know. What's in the closet? I don't know. Then you have families that move every year or two, maybe build a new house. They put organizational systems in place. They know exactly what they have where. They know what their budget is. They know what their blueprint is. And they know, hopefully, what their costs are going to be, plus 10 or 20% at the end of the day. So what you need to look at right now is what sort of house are you in right now? Are you in the older house that's got everything up in the attic, really looks pretty, but you don't want anyone to open the closets and take a look at what you've got back there? Or are you at the stage that you've built your own house? Have you managed your IT system from the ground up? Or did you put a bunch of patches on for Win2K, cross your fingers, and now you're ready to deploy Vista? It's all about what your current state is. And what we really would like to emphasize is that you need that solid foundation to take you forward. There's a lot of ways you can roll out Vista in Windows Server 2008 by patching and shimming and just making it work. I really think, having talked to our customers and been at customer sites, this is your opportunity to really take your application management to the next level and hopefully not have your house of cards underneath. So, what do you need to think about when you first start your application inventory? Are you running a managed environment or an unmanaged environment? They usually say in a well-managed environment, you're going to have the number of seats times 0.8 will equal the number of applications average. Then you can multiply or divide depending on what industry that you're in. But it's a pretty good average we've found. So if you have 10,000 seats, chances are you have about 1,000 applications in your inventory that you need to worry about. And we understand managed or unmanaged is not a clear-cut or clearly defined rule. You also need to think about regionally. Do you have a centrally managed IT department and then independent regional subs? One of our larger bank customers is like this. They have 7,300 plus seats, 7,000 applications managed centrally, but then each region is responsible for their own in-house applications. So what's the environment you're looking like? What's your percentage of in-house applications versus your packaged applications? The next thing to think about, do you have a centralized or autonomous IT department? And again, this is usually really critical for your multinational companies, because in each sub you're going to have different applications, different language issues, different management issues. Availability of the inventories and tools. When you think about what applications are in your system, there's different places you can look. I remember I had a technical writer who said, well, they can just go to add remove programs and write it down, versus an automated tool that we have like Act, versus some of the newer static tools that are out there like Camwood or ChangeBase that are looking at your MSIs. And when you decide first you need to know what your environment is. If you're in a really well-managed environment, then those static tools that are just looking at your MSIs are great. If, however, you have a few more people in the wild than you'd like to admit, you need to think about going to a tool like Act, where you have to deploy the agent, which I know a lot of folks are having issues with, but you deploy the agent, you find out exactly what's on the machines, exactly what the hardware is that you're looking at, and it makes it easier to plan your entire deployment. Also, the scope of your deployment. Are you going on a hardware refresh? Or are you going to just go do a forklift operation? There are pluses and minuses to both of these. Manual or automated inventories. One of the issues that we have and that we've heard a lot within our group is matching up of inventories. If you're running Symantec or Altiris or SMS, and then you put ACT on top of that, or the Windows Vista hardware assessment tool on top of that, we still aren't really good as an industry at synchronizing those. We're working on it. Right now, it's still not good, but that's something you need to think about in your environment. How are you going to centralize your list? What are the tools that you're using to do that? Is it Excel? And again, as I said, static or dynamic analysis is, are you going to use an agent, or are you just going to look at your packages? The next thing is, how many inventories do you actually need to inventory? Again, if you're a well-managed environment, whether you're central or decentralized, you can usually pick a group of desktops to work with. If you're an unmanaged environment, then you're going to need to assess all of your machines. I ran the assessment on about 4 machines in Microsoft, and I came up with over 1,200 applications on 4 machines. So if you multiply that out in an environment that is so unmanaged like Microsoft is, you'll find that you do have far more applications than you actually ever thought you knew about. So how do we take that to the next step? I think of this in three primary categories. I like threes. The first one is relevance, roles, and priorities. Now, the relevance is the one that you as an IT professional can do the most work on prior to kicking off your project. And that's looking for things like multiple versions of the same app. If you run your standard inventory, you're going to find you have 7 or 8 different versions of Adobe Reader in your systems. There's no reason to support 7 or 8 versions, usually, so you can standardize that. When you get deeper into your testing, you're going to have to look for in-house application dependencies on some of those older apps, or maybe looking at alternatives like SoftGrid. But you can usually shrink that list down pretty quickly. The other thing to go to is limited use. How many people are actually using the application? If you have an in-house line of business application that's using a version of Java or JInitiator or one of the technologies that we know is not going to be updated for Vista, you need to look at how many people are using it, what's the business value to you of that particular application, and can you merge applications together? Some of the new software that's come out now, whether it's Office or Windows, actually has a lot of the functionality already included in it that you may be supporting legacy apps for. So take a really good look at your whole application portfolio. The other thing is better tools may be available now. If you deployed something 7 years ago, 12 years ago for the first time and you've been fixing it and patching it ever since, is there a better way to do it now? Is it something you can take to a web-oriented architecture? A lot of different things there. Limited feature development. We had another banking client who called these these were the dead applications because the developers were either dead or gone. Nobody knew where the source code even was, but they were still expected to maintain it. So you really need to look at an application, and especially an in-house line of application. Before you put investment into it, how much access do you have actually to the code or to what you need to fix? So that relevance thing is something that you can look at your list at a very high level and understand really quickly. The next one, which is roles, isn't quite so easy or as quick to figure out as the IT pro, and this is where you need to find out who your partners are in the company. First of all, who is using the application? Obviously, if you run a tool like ACT, it's going to link the application to a particular user. But what you really need to find out is which departments are using it, what functionality are they using. You need to find your business. If you're a larger organization, you'll probably have a business partner who owns the application. If you're a smaller organization, it might be you. But think about who knows what that application does and who knows who's actually using it and what they're using it for. Think about what department are they in. Can you group your departments? Does finance have a different set of applications from marketing? Or are they all merged together? What are your deployment groups? What are your regions? This is another critical factor, region, that we sometimes skim over when we start on our initial categorization. If you have regional applications, what's your support plan for that? Do you have local support? Do you have regional support? Can you centralize? Can you consolidate? So these are a lot of things where you just go through before you even put your plan together. This is part of thinking in your head. Finally, the priority. We have high priority, important, and optional. High priority, sometimes called business critical, it stops your business if it doesn't work. If this application is not running, your business is not running. And you're going to know what those are, your users are going to know who those are. When you get to important and optional applications, again, it's working with your business owners, finding out who the business owner is and who the high-use users are for the applications, because they're going to know what the functionality is and the criticality. Everyone's going to say that the applications on their desktop are high priority and it's work stoppage. You as the IT pro are going to have to partner with your other business partners in the organization to work that prioritization out. So, before we go any farther on that one, what you need to think about while you're doing all these different questions, the relevancy of the application, the age of the application, who's using the application, how critical is it to our business, think about where you want to take your architecture. Do you want to stay maintaining that same number of applications? Do you want to consolidate? Is now the time you want to move or introduce some new platforms into your organization? You know, while you're actually doing this work, pulling your team together, It's a really great opportunity to do an all-up business assessment on what's going to happen. The next thing you need to think about, sort of again, what's your architecture? Who's your team? Who's going to help you find this out? As the IT pro, you can get a fraction of this information. You need to go into the field, talk to the different user groups that you have, and work on putting that plan together. So putting together your plan. This is where a lot of people get stuck as well. Not that hard. There's only 4 things. What resources do you have available? So this is, what hardware do you have? What space do you have even? You know, what bandwidth does the team that's already in place have? Is this something that you're going to do in-house, or is this something you're going to outsource? One thing, I talk to a lot of our SI partners as well who do this, and a lot of them are very interested in getting trained up on helping you with your application management and your inventory management, because it is a deep skill set. If you went to TechNet today and downloaded all the content we have on how to do this, it's probably 30 to 40 hours of just straight on getting through it the first time. So we are working with a lot of our SI partners to get them trained up. So if you do want to outsource it instead of spending the internal resources on building those skills, that's an option. If you have a lot of line of business applications, you might want to build that skill in-house. I have a customer that I'm working with right now that's 80% line of business applications. And they're the ones who were looking at the $9 million bill to offshore those applications to make them work. And I said to them, you've got what, 200 developers in-house? These are your bread and butter line of business applications. You might want to think, instead of outsourcing this, pulling it in-house, making sure that you've got that documented developer knowledge to keep your business running. So there is a story for both outsourcing and doing the training in-house. You need to think about your business, your goals, and your resources. What's your budget? This is, again, I've talked to people who are doing it for a few $1,000s. I've talked to people who have $25 million budgets to get through this. If you think about the steps that I already talked about, take them through your head, go back home, play with the tools that we have, get a general impression of where you're at with your deployment, and then you can start looking at the budget versus the man hours. There are actually, at the end of the deck, a couple slides where we talk about how many man hours we think it takes to do things, and you multiply that out by your cost of man hours. So that is at the end of the deck, but I'm not going to take you through it right now. And again, your team. You need your IT owner, your business owner, your executive approver, and your project manager. In some businesses, the IT owner and the project manager is going to be the same person. In other businesses, it's going to be a group of 20 people working on this. But think really hard about who you want to be on the team for this in terms of the long-term management of your applications. And finally, what sort of infrastructure do you want to move to? Do you want to maintain those legacy apps, or do you want to build them up? So the next steps is, first of all, what's your toolbox? We have some great tools from Microsoft that are free for download. We have BDD, the Application Compatibility Toolkit, Windows Vista Hardware Assessment Tool. SMS has some tools involved. We have AIS coming out for MDOT customers. So there are a lot of tools available through Microsoft, as well as the tools that companies like Altiris and Camwood and Changebase and other companies have to offer you, depending on your environment. You need to think about what sort of virtualization you want. If you want to use virtualization, do you want to start application virtualization in your environment? Do you want to go with a PC virtualization? Do you want to go purely server virtualization? And then what level of support are you comfortable with? This is the one little trick, if you want to call it that people run up against. We can shim almost any application to make it work.
Most, yes.
Pretty much. However, if you shim an ISV application and then deploy it in your enterprise, you may not get the support from the ISV to run that application. So what level of support do you need on your applications? If you only have 3 users and you can shim it to get it running, I call that thumbs up. But if it is one of your business critical applications, do you really want to go without ISV support? ISV is your software vendor who created it, like, for example, Oracle. And then finally, what's your level of comfort for your in-house applications versus your ISV applications? What's your support level of comfort there? So, as I said, there's a white paper going up on TechNet later today or tomorrow on sort of just working your way through these steps. And I'm going to turn over to Chris, and Chris is going to talk about some of the tools and resources that are available to help you get here, to help you make the decisions. As I said, our goal for you leaving here is to have a really clear idea of what direction you want to take next. And tomorrow we'll have some deeper technical, putting the shims in place.
Oh, very good, yes.
Sassiness with shims.
Absolutely. Well, great. Well, let's talk a little bit about the tools. And we took the hand count earlier. There weren't too many of you who were saying, oh, yes, I'm using ACT. And I will tell you that matches exactly with my experience. Week after week, I work with a new customer for about once every 2 weeks. I see exactly the same thing, is that customers aren't using ACT for what we expected that they would use it for. Right? The original design was all based on, well, you're going to deploy agents to some sampling of your current users and monitor them using their software as they would normally do for their day-to-day work. That was the original idea. And what we found out is that's not what people use it for. What we found out instead was people would say, well, I'm going to include an ACT agent on my pilot deployments. Not all the agents were designed to be optimized to run on Windows Vista. So we're like, okay, maybe we need to think about that a little bit differently. Some were saying, well, I'm just going to run them in my lab or some subset. I really just want to get the community data. So we've tried to really react to that in continuing to evolve the application compatibility toolkit. Among the tools that we have, and we're just going to go into a few that we have here, we have the deployment accelerators. We just released the new Microsoft deployment. That was yesterday, wasn't it? Just yesterday. Just came out. The application compatibility toolkit, and we'll talk about the member pieces of that toolkit and some of the changes. The Windows Vista hardware assessment. The application compatibility cookbook, which we just recently updated for Windows Server 2008. It is really targeted towards developers, but the same principles apply even if you're not writing code. And it's not a code-heavy document. So yes, the language is not targeted towards the IT pro, but the information, the knowledge that you gain absolutely is. And what we did as a team, and on my team, is we took the contents of that cookbook and distilled it into training that would be relevant towards the IT pro and not so developer-focused. We recorded that training several months ago now, and we posted it up on Connect as an open download for anyone. I linked to it off of my blog, so you're welcome to go and grab it. My blog is blogs.msdn.com/cjax, so that we can take the content from that cookbook and put it into the perspective of someone who's actually implementing the system and not a developer. We also have a bunch of TechNet guidance as well around application compatibility. Now, I'm a technical person and not an executive, so I never get an announcing slide. And guess what? Today I still don't get an announcing slide, but I'm going to announce something anyway, because I don't think it's been announced, is that we actually just completed a new release of the Application Compatibility Toolkit, which is 5.0.2. Brand new. It should be coming out shortly.
I think it's out.
Oh, it's already posted?
Should be, yeah. We're supposed to be.
Okay. Supposedly it's already posted now.
They're all in a different time zone from me, so I haven't been quite on the top of my postings. So. Act 5.02 will be out early this week. I told them they had till tomorrow.
And basically what it is it's a collection of all the features that all the customers that we're talking to, that all of you said, you know what, this would be useful to me if it only did this. And we're like, okay, let's see what we can do. What are the big pain points? Because all of these features weren't designed by us. These were designed by you guys, saying we need this. This is critical to us for this application to be useful to me. What did we put in there? Well, we're getting ready for Windows Vista Service Pack 1. So we put a reporting node in there for Service Pack 1. Well, that wasn't a very hard change. One big piece of feedback. I talked about how people were using ACT in lab settings, and they wanted to be able to go in and look at stuff as they're going through and testing. Well, until now, ACT 5.0 depended on the 1.1 framework, which means if you want to run it on Vista, you've got to first install the 1.1 framework, then install the 1.1 SP1 update, which then requires a reboot, which then has a suppressed auto run, which you have to approve. Finally, you can install ACT and use it. Kind of unfortunate for the tool you're using to get to Vista to have that experience on Vista. So we said, you know what? You guys are right. We'll fix it. And now we just run on 2.0. Another big pain point. Hey, I'm running SMS here. I'd like to push out all of these data collection packages to the clients that I've selected, and you're giving me an exe. Come on. Now we give you an MSI for pushing out. Another pain point. Hey, your installer for your data collection package is dropping MSXML6. And shortly after we released Act 5, we patched MSXML6. So now we're dropping an unpatched MSXML6, which means all the computers I'm collecting from suddenly don't pass muster on my network. So we said, you know what? Rather than just going to the patch, let's get rid of MSXML6 and get rid of that concern altogether. Done. Shim improvements, not necessarily the shims themselves, but the documentation. If you're working on application remediation and you're considering shims and you start diving into the shim documentation, previously you wouldn't find nearly as much helpful information as I think you should have. So we said, you know what? That's our fault. Let's fix it. So what are we doing to fix it? Well, we've got a session coming up tomorrow where we'll be talking about that, and a lot of the contents of that session we put into the documentation itself, and we'll take a peek at that shortly.
I'm going to interrupt you for a second.
Sure.
We do have an ACT news group on TechNet. If you go to the TechNet news groups, there is an ACT 5.0 news group, and the people who are on it include the program manager who decides on features, as well as Chris and some of the other team. So if you do use ACT, or if you do have reasons that you don't want to use it, or if you do have questions, the forum is an excellent, excellent resource for you, because this is a tool for you. This isn't a tool that we make money on. This is a tool to help you with your deployment and help you with your jobs. So we do take feedback on it and we do implement it. So the forums are a great place for you to go and talk to people. Or if you want, come and take my card and I'll take it back to program management. So.
Sure.
Sorry.
Absolutely. Well, we'll keep going. We have the ability to filter by domain. Right? Again, depending on how you happen to be segmenting your deployment, that may be useful for going through and doing your categorization of applications. Another big pain point, time and time again, working with customers who are saying, you know, I'm using a proxy and it doesn't happen to be your proxy, and that's okay. But it needs authentication, and when I go through to try and synchronize with the ACT community, the passport isn't really playing so nicely with my proxy server. Or I don't want to have a passport just to go and get information the way that that works. So we said, you know what? I think you're right. So we took out the dependency on passport. Now you can just synchronize directly with the community. So rather than seeing more slideware, let's take a look at some of the changes that we've made. So if we go into the compatibility manager, you can see straight away, if I go to exports, my data collection package, I now get an MSI. Right, here's my MSI. I can then go through and deploy using all of the standard techniques that we have been evangelizing for so long. We're finally complying with that as well. In the Analyze tab, here we have the reports for Windows Vista Service Pack 1. I guess before we just skim right past that, you know, we have put out some guidance around Service Pack 1. I don't know if you want to echo that guidance in this
For testing?
For testing and how that affects everything.
Okay, first of all, SP1 will be released in the first quarter of next year. It's the current release target date for it. In terms of testing, if you've already started your testing on your Vista Gold or your Vista RTM code, you should continue that testing on. And when you do get your final version of SP1, you should treat it like any critical patch, which would be a second test pass on your business critical applications. We understand that that's, in a way, a double test pass. But at the same time, if it doesn't work on Vista, chances are really good it's not going to work on SP1. That's because the changes that we made around the standard user, the changes that we made around Gina Session 0, the networking stack, Windows resource protection, those changes are all still included in SP1. We're not undoing them. There are a few more applications that will work because we put shims in the box for them. There's a few more applications that will break. Most of those we've been actually dealing directly with the ISVs, trying to get them to tweak their code a little bit, because we don't like the code may not be 100% excellent code. So we are going back and forth on that, but you can do your basic testing on Windows Vista RTM and then again a second test pass on SP1 once it releases. If you're in the SP1 beta, what we would really like you to do is test on RTM and test on each of the beta releases as well, because we are taking any breaking applications for SP1. Our first priority is that those are a Microsoft issue, and we'll do everything we can to fix it. There are some we found that we've decided not to, but we're working with the ISVs, and we will publish that list of known regressions and accepted regressions with the release of SP1. So you absolutely can begin testing now. The work I described at the beginning of this as well, if you haven't started yet, that's a good, depending on your organization, 2 to 8 months of work before you actually even get to really serious coding. So if you haven't started, don't let SP1 hold you up on getting your inventories and starting your planning. If you want to do your basic testing against it, especially if you're trying to move to a standard user or a managed environment away from an admin environment, again, all those issues that break on Vista RTM will still break on SP1. So you can start your testing, you can start your mitigation now. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, absolutely. No, I didn't want to digress into that. Before I go too much further, I guess the question would be, I'm coming in with the assumption, simply because I probably go to too many events like this, that most people have seen the application compatibility toolkit at all, and I'm kind of skipping to the new stuff. I guess I'll ask the question, has anyone never seen ACT and has no idea what we're talking about up here? Okay, well, let's talk a little bit more in depth rather than skimming then. When we talk about the application compatibility toolkit, specifically, this piece is the Application Compatibility Manager. It's designed to help you manage end-to-end that whole migration process. There are other tools as part of the kit, which is why we call it kit, that are designed for the developer or designed for the tester to assist in certain scenarios. So this tool is designed to help you get going in the first place and manage that process end-to-end, and we're trying to help inform and guide the decisions that you make. So when we look at the Analyze tab, we're seeing here are all the applications that I have. If I have included compatibility evaluators when I deployed my data collection packages, it will tell me if it detected any known issues. What type of issues can we detect? We can detect issues with user account control. The basics. We don't detect them all. It's not comprehensive, because here's the deal. We're trying to create an agent that you can run on as many machines in your network as you're willing to wait for the logs on. And that could be a lot. And your users are probably trying to get some actual work done and not just test for you. So performance was absolutely critical. When we look at something like user account control, there are all kinds of things that can go wrong if you're not an administrator on the machine. What are the most basic and the most frequent mistakes that people make around not designing with the standard user in mind when they ought to be? Is writing to program files or other protected locations. It's got the directory name of my application. I feel like I own it. Why can't I write there? Well, because it's protected on purpose. We'll detect that with our compatibility evaluator. We'll detect writing to HKey local machine. But we don't do much beyond that. We don't look really in depth at things like mutexes or other more esoteric checks that we could be doing and that our more diagnostic tool, standard user analyzer, will do. But chances are, if your application makes any mistakes, it's probably file and registry related. There may be more, but that's a pretty good clue that this is not designed as a standard user. It'll raise those flags. We have the Windows Vista compatibility evaluator, and that will look for things like deprecated components, Windows resource protection, which is we are preventing you from writing to on top of Windows operating system files. I've seen some very creative ways people try to get around that on previous incarnations of our operating system, and we essentially prevent all of those from succeeding today. And we also have the Internet Explorer compatibility evaluator, or as I and my customers refer to as the lab compatibility evaluator, because it only works if you're running on Internet Explorer 7. And you think to yourself, so you want me to deploy IE7 before I've tested my apps on IE7? I don't think so. So clearly that's something that we do in a lab environment where the users can come in and test it. So we have all of those compatibility evaluators that can look for the most common known issues and report them back. And when we look here, we can see the output. ACT provides you with filters that will let you see the issues that you have, right? Which have issues at all. Well, here's one. Let's pick one at random. What are the issues? UACCE, User Account Control Compatibility Evaluator. Now, it may be that this is okay. What if the application has to run as an administrator to do its job? Well, we'll still flag it, but the data is not meaningful. So you have to think about the output that you get, but you can go in and see all of the issues that we flagged, as well as any issues that came from the community if you choose to synchronize with the ACT community. You don't have to if you do not want to, but you can. A lot of government institutions in particular say, you know what, I don't want anybody to know what I'm running. Any possibility they could determine who I am and what software I have in my environment, not okay. Or maybe I'm secured. Maybe the machines I need to test do not have public internet access and never will. The tool is still useful, even without that, in terms of getting your inventory, categorizing your inventory, and understanding the most common known issues.
I think one piece of feedback I've gotten too is when I talk to customers about ACT and the inventory evaluators, they are deployed into your live working environment, your production environment. And for the most part, people say, oh no, that's going to slow down my end users, it's going to cause them grief, I'm going to get phone calls, I'm going to get support costs. I have not had a single customer who has deployed into their environment these agents come back to us and say, the customer noticed the agent. So it's something to think about. If you want the thorough evaluation that you aren't going to get from a static analysis agent, and you really do need that dynamic deeper dive, try it out on a few machines. Try it out on your own machine. You can download this tool and run the agent and see if it affects you. Try it out on a couple other machines. For the most part, the people who've used it and deployed it have found it to have pretty much a zero impact on the end user. So don't be afraid that it's a deployed agent in your environment. We haven't had any complaints yet. If you have a complaint, call me. I'll send someone to help you.
Yeah, actually, there is one person who has noticed the evaluators on the machine. That person was a developer in a different group at Microsoft who noticed it in the stack trace while they were debugging their own software. That's the only time I've ever heard anyone comment about it.
Okay, someone found it.
Well, he didn't know what it was. He's like, this is in my stack, and I don't know what it is. I'm like, oh, that's ours.
My favorite, we run this in MSIT across about 15,000 desktops. So I get the list of logs, and I look for people I know in the log list to see what applications they're running.
Yeah, we run a lot. So we can use this to go through and filter what we're looking at. This is something that is new, which is the domain name. So I can see, oh, show me all the ones that are in northamerica.corp.microsoft.com. And here are the pieces of software that are installed on people who are in my North America domain. Or I can filter by other domains, Redmond, or what have you. So that's new. So we can use this filter to go through and dynamically sort what we're going to see. Now, when we talk about what we probably want to filter on, it's all based on, well, what software do I actually want to test? Well, number one, I want to prioritize. What is important for me to get tested? And guess what? You probably can't make this decision on your own. There's probably some business owner somewhere that has a vote into what's really important to getting their job done. Right? So there needs to be some kind of workflow developed. Again, a lot of this is process and not technology to determine what's truly important to keeping my business running. What piece of software can't go down or my pager goes off inside of 3 minutes? So I can understand and categorize that using consistent rules. Right? So we'll just clear the filter. We'll just pick one and categorize it. So let's take application verifier. Right here, I can go in and say this, for me, business critical because I run an IT organization that develops software. So I have to have that. I can also apply categories. Now, we start off with a couple of defaults. Who's the software vendor? How hard is it going to be to test? Software vendor is useful if you have good relationships with a subset of vendors. So you can go through and determine, hey, as long as I'm calling so-and-so at Adobe or so-and-so at Oracle to have a conversation about what's coming down the pike, let's pull up all of the issues we seem to be having as part of our Vista migration and have that conversation so we don't have to keep calling them over and over again. That can be useful in that situation. The categories that we give you, I think, are far from enough, and they need to be customized and can be customized. You can edit this. What are some things that are typically added? Well, how are you going to deploy it? The most successful customers I have worked with who are doing a Windows Vista deployment and doing their compatibility testing categorize and do their testing by role, because people in the same role generally use the same pieces of software. So if I'm working with an airline, I'm looking at, okay, the gate agents, the people who are taking the tickets and checking people in and making changes, that's a role. They have a set of software. Maybe it's 20, 30 pieces of software. Maybe they have a chat client. Maybe they have the looking up for a ticket or making changes to a ticket. That piece of software, usually custom grown. I can find all of the software for people who work in that role. I can test it all at once, and when I'm done, that role is ready to be deployed. I need to define those roles. They vary, not only by industry, but usually by individual customer to customer. I can define that inside of this tool. Another very useful category, maybe I'm going to deploy by region. Because in addition to differing by role, because of export restrictions, I have some software I can't run in certain places, so I'll categorize by that as well. Another creative one that I found very helpful was, I'm going to put a category in here for who is the tester that I've currently assigned this piece of software to for testing, and who's the business owner. So I can track those people down and have a conversation that is, again, comprehensive, start to finish. Whether I use ACT or any other tool, that's important information to associate with that piece of software. So this is made by Microsoft, probably going to be fairly hard to test. Right? I can keep track of where I am in the process. Have I not started? Am I testing it? Have I finished testing and I know what's wrong with it? Or is it ready to go? Or have I decided not to go? Because that's another important aspect of the testing process, is that you will probably find a lot of software that you are not interested in keeping going. Most customers that I've worked with find, wow, I have 7 different versions of Adobe Reader across my organization. That's probably costing my help desk money. I worked with one customer, and they were fantastic. And I found out why they were fantastic. They outsourced their help desk. So every single additional application they had was a line item on a bill. So guess what? Every 3 to 6 months, they went through their entire software inventory and started crossing things off that they didn't think they needed anymore. They didn't have that same kind of duplication. But most people don't do that because you don't see it on a bill. It really does cost you money, but you don't see it listed there.
We did some work with, I think it was one of the councils in the UK, and they got, this was an XP rollout, but they got from about 4,000 applications to 450 applications that they were supporting. Well, 450 packages that they were supporting at the end of this categorization and prioritization. So I know it sounds like a lot of work, but if you put that process and thought in place in the front end, that's when your real cost and IO savings come out in the end. But we had a communications company, 12,000 on their first pass. They're down to what, 600 now?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah. So it's not just hocus pocus. You really are going to find, as you start digging into this, that you can get your inventory list down, and you can get it down really quickly and not too painfully, especially when you have support costs to talk about.
Okay. And then finally, you vote on it. Does it work? Does it not work? This one I haven't finished testing on, so I can't say conclusively. I can open new issues in here. If my compatibility evaluators have caught anything, that will show up here. If others in the ACT community have detected issues, they will be reported in the tool. And then I add my own if I detect issues. Right? Add a new issue. I can just drop something new in and track it that way, and then resolve it once it's there. I can see the properties of the application and any computers that it is installed on. This one's only installed on 2. So perhaps that may help me determine how important it is, depending on who those 2 people happen to be. In addition to the applications themselves, we can look at installers. We have the setup analysis tool, which will report its results back into this. This I have found extremely helpful if you're getting ready for a migration to 64-bit Windows, because we're going to detect 32-bit device drivers, which won't work on Vista 64. We're going to detect 16-bit applications, which won't work on Windows Vista 64-bit. And we'll also track every single thing that we did as part of the setup. So we can see all the files we dropped and all the registries entries that we created or modified. We can look at all the computers and all the devices, as well as an assessment from the hardware vendor as to whether or not this has a driver that's green check, which means it's in the box, or yellow exclamation point, it's not in the box, but you can go to the manufacturer's website and download it, or red X, which means the vendor told us, hey, I am never going to make a driver for this device. If you want to go to Vista, you'll have to buy a new one. So that's the Application Compatibility Manager, which you can use to help manage that process and create custom reports and export custom reports. We have a number of other tools that we include. We have tools for measuring compatibility with Internet Explorer 7, which, just like the evaluator, require Internet Explorer 7 on the box. Great for a testing environment. What's the difference between the two? They run the exact same code. The evaluator runs from the time you specify it to start until the time you specify it to end without any user intervention whatsoever. The test tool runs from the time you press go until the time you press stop. Other than that, everything else is exactly the same. You'll get the exact same data. That's the only one where the information you get inside of the Application Compatibility Manager is exactly the same as what you would see.
One thing that we need to say about the evaluators only run when you schedule them to run, and they only detect issues if the application is launched during that period. So you want to be careful when you're deploying them. If you're deploying, for example, to your finance group, you want to make sure that you're deploying your evaluators while the finance group is running all those line of business applications that they need to work on. So if it's the last week of the quarter, just make sure that the users are actually launching an application, and you need to work that into your test plan. We haven't figured out a way yet to detect if the application was launched or not. We just know that it's there and whether or not it has issues. So you want to be careful with your deployments of the agents that you deploy them during a time when they're going to use their applications.
Okay, well, let's go in and talk about one test tool in particular, which we put some exciting new changes into, because it addresses probably the most pervasive problem across the entire industry, and yes, that means us too. It's people who are not developing targeting the standard user, making it very painful to run as non-admin across an organization. We're as guilty as everyone else is. Probably more so because every single time our premier development environment starts up, it says, hey, why don't you run me as an admin? Which means, guess what? You may accidentally create things that depend on being admin because you happen to be one at the time when you launch it. And now we have all the tester tools included as part of the package. So now your testers are running as admin as well, at least for this piece of software. Now it gets all the way to the end before you catch things, which is the most expensive time to fix bugs. Guess what? Visual Studio 2008 does not have that warning anymore. Right? But across the board, people consistently have this problem unless they have made it all the way through the pain of getting to a standard user desktop, of dealing with user account control, preventing them from running a significant percentage of their software. So we had this great tool called Standard User Analyzer which is really good for both the developer because it will tell you down to the line of code where things are broken, but it also has some fabulous features for the IT pro because you don't have to know code to get problems fixed in a great deal of instances. So let's take a look at one application. This is a new feature, by the way, which is Standard User Analyzer does wipe out your application verifier logs. As a developer who uses application verifier and occasionally doesn't save off the logs that he actually needs, I appreciate now that it stops me and says, oh, remember, we're going to wipe out your logs as we go. That's new. We'll launch the application, use a few of the options. All right, and you know what I should have done? I should have shown it breaking. Let me run it again. I can uncheck the option to elevate. When I check the option to elevate, right, for the tester, that's usually the way to go. Because even though we'll detect the problem, and you can tell that we actually have detected quite a few issues as we go, if your application crashes, if it's not running as an administrator, and a lot of them do, you will only be able to test up to the first crash. So as a tester, running it elevated can help you get through all of your tests without having to crash, fix the first problem, get to the next crash, fix that one, get to the next crash, fix that one, which can frequently be the case. You can just detect them all at one time and then go through and fix them all at one time, and it short circuits that. But for demo purposes, let's show it actually not working. A very familiar error message. You have to be an administrator to run this. Usually the applications just exit. Since this is a demo, it doesn't. I'm going to see some crashing. Another of my favorite types of error message, random hexadecimal digits that's flashing up to the user. How friendly is that? If I go into my options, I'm just going to get a crash. I try to check for updates.
This is why Chris is a SWAT guy and not a developer, because this is the kind of application he writes.
Right, and here's, this is a good one too. I'll talk about the Program Compatibility Assistant in terms of testing. Briefly, the Program Compatibility Assistant is a feature in Windows Vista that is designed to detect when something went wrong after it goes wrong and fix it. And in a lot of cases, it works. But here's the thing. It has to fail the first time. If you're looking at an application and you see this, the fix that we apply from the Compatibility Assistant is always a shim that you can apply before the user runs it for the first time. So if you see this message, it's time to go sorting around in the registry to see what shim did we apply if it actually fixes it, so you can get it on your users' desktops before they have the failure. So if I start the registry editor, I can see, oh, stock viewer, it called Elevate Create Process. That's a shim that I can apply myself. Isn't that convenient? Now I know, and I can get it on my users' desktops before they have to see it fail. So let's go ahead and get rid of that, because I want to apply the shim myself. Reset that. And take a look at what we see in Standard User Analyzer. Well, if I'm a developer, I can get lots of great information. I can get all the way down to stack traces, which I don't have right now because I'm not connected to the internet, so I don't have all of my symbols. But I can see the detailed information of exactly what I was doing when I ran into the problem. Here's a shortened stack trace. As a developer, that's pretty helpful. You can give this to your developers and say, here are the problems that we found in your application. Can you please fix them? And in fact, I have had people send that off to third-party vendors who have said, the problem is not with our software, the problem is with Windows itself. It's just full of all kinds of problems. And they're like, well, here's a Standard User Analyzer output that says exactly what you're doing wrong. Now we know it's clearly that the application is not designed to be used by the standard user, which is what we're going. Could you kindly fix the application for us? And sending that information has been helpful for them in getting the results of a new functioning application.
I've been working with a team over the last year that we've reached out to a couple hundred of our major ISVs that represent a few thousand applications that are used in the enterprise. Pretty much the best way we have of getting an ISV to get a compatible version available is to have the customers contact them directly. Remember, we called Oracle about a year ago and said, hey, we have some customers having some issues. And Oracle said, well, no one's going to deploy your OS. Why should we fix it? But when we actually got the customers who were deploying in touch with them, they started moving forward. And now we're at the point where all of the Oracle apps are either Vista compatible, we have a roadmap for when they will be compatible, or we know they're not going to be compatible. So you as a customer have the strongest voice in dealing with the ISVs. We can help, we do help. I have a whole team that I work with that does reach out to ISVs when we find blocking applications. But you have an incredibly strong voice as the customer to reach out to those ISVs. You know, Steve Chan's blog on oracle.com, that's one of the best places to go and say, hey, this isn't working for me. But I said they've been a particularly good partner in making sure that they do have a roadmap published out now.
Good. Okay, so that can be helpful in some situations, but if I'm not a developer, I probably don't care about that. I care about fixing the application. Can I fix it? And there's this mitigation tab that just says, you know what, can you please just fix it for me? We had this in 5.0 and 5.0.1, where you can apply mitigations and just say, hey, fix this application for me, please. And it just would. What we didn't have was this little menu option, which is take them off now, please, which now we have. That's very helpful. And here's another thing that we heard from you guys, which is, well, okay, great. My tester is running it on their machine, and they can put those fixes on the machine to get it working on their machine. But guess what? The tester usually doesn't know how to use the software very well. And that's true for just about every tester who's very technical, right? You sit me down in front of, and this has happened, you know, here's a piece of software designed to help you create and model in 3D screws for oil rigs that consist of 6 million vertices. I don't know how to design one of those screws. I need someone who designs screws to come down and sit in my lab and use the software. And that's one thing that we had to go back and rethink. It's like, okay, the tester can figure out once they go through and analyze it in the debugger and see what's going on, and oh, this can help me try it out. But now I can export an MSI and drop it on my lab machine that my business user who actually knows how to run the software can come down and use. That is so much easier now that I can just drop an MSI and install it, or even push it out to different desktops, frequently virtual machines. It's really helpful, I have found, to use virtual machines, because then if you have some kind of problem that really alters the state of the machine to the point where it's not really usable anymore, undo disks are awesome. Click close and say, do you want to save the changes? Oh, no. No, I don't. Now, before I learned that trick, I went through, we had an application, and this was a doozy. This was back in the release candidate. We actually had to fix this bug. But the application itself, during install time, after you finished installing it, it broke all of COM. And what uses COM in Windows? Everything. Explorer never worked again. The machine never booted again. It just became a brick. And we're trying to debug this. And if you go one step too far, COM's broken again. Pull the machine out, stick it back, re-image it, get a new machine, and keep going on it. With a virtual machine, that reset is 1 second. Click close, please undo disks. I don't want to commit those changes. Let's start over again. It makes it much easier. So now I can deploy this MSI to my testing machines that people are using much, much easier. So let's go ahead and undo the mitigations, and now I'm back to business as normal. We talked about the documentation of shims, and we'll go into detail on this in my session tomorrow if mitigating issues is of interest to you. Most of that content got documented. So it's all right here. And if there are 2 shims that are used more than any other one in the world, actually there are 3 classes of shims. But if you know those 3, you can resolve just about every compatibility problem you'll come across. Not all of them, but more than 80%. Those are the version lies. Just tell it it's an older version of the operating system, and guess what? It just works. Right? That fixes more issues than any other shim, if you put them all together, that we have. And then problems with the registry and the file system, either because of permissions issues or because we've changed paths and there are hard-coded paths. We need to point them someplace else. We can fix those with correct file paths, which we have now documented. We had this documented before. We didn't tell you what the command line was. And without the command line, you really can't use it. It doesn't do anything useful until you tell it what you need to correct. Now we tell you what we do and how you can configure it to do what you need it to do.
I have to tell you, we have an internal conference. It's called Tech Ready. And Chris prepared the mitigating issues with shims for Tech Ready. And I had people stopping me in the street saying, that was the best session ever. So fortunately, he's going to do it here tomorrow. We also have a virtual hands-on lab that's going to be available on TechNet next week, as well as a white paper that Chris has written. So if you can't make it to his session tomorrow, you've got a couple other options. Again, about another week or 2, the virtual hands-on lab will be ready and the white paper he wrote. So if you do want to do a deeper dive into shims, highly encourage you to go to his session tomorrow. But if you can't make it, we have a lot of documentation coming out around it too.
Here's the other good one, virtual registry. Virtual registry is also command line driven. We documented 0 of the command lines previously. You can see there are a few, and they do a little bit of work. So now you actually have access to all of this information, right, that previously, right, I'm no magician. What did I do to find this out? I started out because doing exactly what all of you would have to do. I'm like, okay, well, let's take a look. Let's see what's being done by the system already and kind of try to reverse engineer it. Let's start looking at things in a debugger. And that became so frustrating to me that I said, you know what? No one should have to put up with this. I can't. There are people out there who are already black belts and shims. I applaud them. I could not do it. I gave up. And I said, can I just get source access to the shims? And I'm just going to write them up. I couldn't do it. Impossible. So we finally are, and as soon as I found out myself, I'm like, you know what? Everyone else is going to want to know this too. So I wrote about it in my own little way. Fortunately, we have people who are actually good writers who can then translate it to something that's readable and interesting, who have documented those things. Those all appear. And the other big thing that we have, which I don't have an internet connection so I can't show you, but when we look at the application compatibility toolkit, one of the most useful things that a lot of customers were interested in is seeing the community data, specifically the vendor data. What is the vendor saying? And what we found is that not enough vendors said anything. So we thought to ourselves, we need to figure out a better solution because that's not giving you guys the information you need. And you told us that. We said, okay, what else can we do? So Peg spun up a team. Was it your idea? Whose idea was it?
It was, well, there's a couple people in the back of the room. We take a bit of credit too.
We have a group of people.
We have a virtual team, which in Microsoft is actually pretty amazing, from Windows Sustainable Engineering, COSD, which is the core operating services division, the developer team that builds the core, and developer and platform evangelism, who owns the relationships with the ISVs, as well as me, who I'm sort of, I call myself chief cat herder, that we get together on a weekly basis and see how we're going to solve these problems for you. So one of the things that came up was we do have a website that's appreadiness.com. And what you're going to find there is a list of all the logoed applications, a list of all the applications that we could find vendor verification. So if we could find a link on the website that said we support Vista, we put that application on the list. The bad news is it doesn't sync with ACT right now. The good news is the database was architected so we can eventually get those two in together, and we're working on that right now. So you will be able to see this data through there. We have architected it that way. It's not quite there yet, but we wanted to get the information out to you as quickly as we can. So that's another option for you. And if you have a Microsoft account representative, you can actually get a download of that entire database. We haven't found a way for privacy reasons yet to actually make a full download available, but if you talk to your local Microsoft person, they can get a copy of that for you.
Yep, so that's the other great new thing that makes it very helpful. So that's sort of a quick tour through ACT, focusing on the new features that we have.
And tomorrow there is a lightning demo which will take you through sort of step-by-step ACT, if you haven't seen it, all the steps 1 through 6, as well as the compatibility administrator.
We'll talk briefly about, well, I've organized my inventory. I've figured out, using whatever tool. If I use ACT, great. If I just use ACT to maybe test in my lab environment, that's great. A lot of customers do that. But I've, at some point, gotten down to, here's my list of applications I'm actually going to test. And now I'm testing them. And I'm using the tools you provided to help me test them. And I found out what's wrong, and I need to figure out what I'm going to do to fix it. Well, I need to think about that. What's my strategy before I go into it? The best solution is always to fix the code, because then you are absolutely certain that it works consistently right because it's been reviewed for that, or as certain as you can be with any piece of software that's out there. Another option is to use shims, which we'll talk about tomorrow. When do people normally use shims? Well, I bought the software from a third party that's now out of business, so they can't fix the code. They didn't give it to me, and they're not around anymore. Or it was developed internally, and here's a common scenario. It was developed internally, and we have a new version coming up. Schedule is it'll be done in a year and a half, and my deployment is scheduled in 6 months. Well, maybe I can use shims as a stopgap in between the two. Or I may be able to modify my security policy or change the ACLs on an object if the problem is running as a standard user to resolve that. But it's something to think about. What am I okay with in my organization, and what am I not okay with? Figuring out what you can do is the first step in determining what's okay, but it's as much a business decision as it is a technology decision. A brief side note on SoftGrid, which a lot of people talk about in reference to application compatibility. In essence, it puts a little bubble around the application that virtualizes the file system and the registry, so that if you try to write something, it writes to its own place. It is exceptionally good at resolving issues where there is application-to-application interaction. It is also very good if you have an application that has a compatibility issue not with Windows Vista, but say with Office 2007, which is commonly deployed alongside Windows Vista. And the application may only work in Office 2003. Well, I could virtualize my Office 2003 application and actually run it on the same machine that's also running Office 2007 to keep that application going until it can be resolved.
And I think when we were talking earlier about what's the mitigation story you want to use for each of your apps, some of the legacy apps, SoftGrid is a fabulous option for if you don't want to support 2 or 3 older versions of Office, but you have dependencies for some of your line of business apps, for example. You can actually package an older version of Excel with the application that's depending on it, and then you can stream that out. So there are some great opportunities there in terms of decreasing your application portfolio that you're running on the hard drive as you move towards a more virtual environment overall.
Yeah, but one thing I've said many times is if you can fix it with SoftGrid, I can fix it with shims. And no one's been able to prove me wrong so far. But you have a choice. What's your strategy? There's value in using SoftGrid. Choose to use SoftGrid for the value you see, not simply to resolve application compatibility issues, because there are other alternatives to achieve the same result. And you can pick your strategy intelligently based on what you need. And the final option is simply run it in an older version of the operating system, either through virtualization or through remote desktop into a machine that's sitting somewhere, right? Because clearly if it runs on Windows 2000, it will continue to run on Windows 2000 if you simply run Windows 2000. Now there are some user experience issues with that. Having 2 start menus can be pretty confusing for some people. You can use virtual server, and one very clever option that I wanted to share is one customer I worked with. Again, all the really good ideas I don't take credit for, those aren't mine. They had an application that was built on Paradox for DOS. It did not run on a version of Windows more current than Windows 95. They were nervous about supporting Windows 95. They commissioned a new version of the application, and that time frame was about 2 years to develop that application. So in the interim, they had to keep running Windows 95 to keep this application going. And guess what? Business critical for every single person in the organization to run every single day, all day long. What are they going to do to make that happen? Well, originally they had virtual PC. As they started getting to the point where not everyone was running the old version, but they were piloting and they were slowly and gradually rolling out the new application, they got to the point where they had far fewer users who were running it. And at that point, they said, you know, let's host this in virtual server, and let's resolve our final pain point for this interim period before we finally finish our deployment of our new software, which is my Windows 95 box is getting corrupted in virtual PC. Let's drop it on virtual server and script it so that every time you try to connect, it'll grab a new copy that's fresh and clean. It was all database driven, so they didn't need to keep any state on the machine itself. Run the application and then automatically blink it out using undo disks when the user disconnects, because that could all be scripted. So now they can connect up, get a clean Windows 95 box that actually worked, run the application as long as they needed to. When they closed it, that instance went away, and the next time they connected, they got another clean Windows 95 box, which I thought was quite clever.
I'd also like to really encourage you to come down to the show floor. We have, at the Windows Vista booth, we have some of our virtualization specialists, as well as a lot of our European TSPs, who've been doing local deployments, who understand your issues, who've been facing this pain day to day. So we have a lot of content up on TechNet. If it's not there now, it will be in the next day or two as I work around on North American and European time. Again, we have the white paper on starting to really analyze and categorize your applications. We have Chris's new white paper coming out shortly on mitigating with shims. We have a virtual hands-on lab coming out. Stop by the booth, we can share more information. In your bag that you got when you checked in, there is an IT Pro Tools disk, a little Vista disk. That's got all of the application compatibility tools on it, as well as BDD and all the documentation. We have about 10 hours of one of Chris's teammates actually delivering the in-depth technical session that he was discussing. So that disk was in your bag when you checked in. All this content's available there except for the brand new stuff, which will be out this week on TechNet and available for download. Again, you have access to this deck, which has a lot of the links to the content that you need. Unfortunately, I don't think we have time for any questions. We are doing a Chalk Talk next. Chris is doing a Chalk Talk. I'll be available at the booth. If you do want to come up and have any questions, we're happy to answer those. Please don't forget to fill out your evaluation forms, and have a great show.
Great. Thanks for attending. We appreciate your time.